Welcome. Tonight, we explore the vast, humming machine of the Industrial Revolution, focusing not on people, but on how it all worked. So, find your favorite spot, settle in, and pull that blanket up just a little higher. Let your shoulders relax and your breathing slow to a gentle rhythm. There is no rush here at all. Just allow the day to fade away as you get comfortable. I wonder where you are listening from. Is it late evening where you are? Or are you perhaps stealing a quiet moment during a perfectly busy afternoon? Whatever your time zone, I am so glad you have found this little corner of quiet. If you would like to join us for more journeys like this one, a quick follow on your app ensures you never miss a chapter. Now, let's travel back. Before the great engines and sprawling factories, we find a world lit mostly by firelight. The rhythm of life is not set by a factory clock, but by the sun itself and the strength of a person's own hands. Our story begins right there, in the quiet workshops of the 1700s. To understand the great age of engines, one must first listen to the silence that came before it. The story does not begin with the roar of a furnace or the clatter of a factory, but inside a quiet, low-beamed English cottage in the early 18th century. Here, the sounds were those of life itself, a rhythm set by hand and season. A peat fire might crackle gently in the stone hearth, its smoke adding a faint, earthy scent to the room, and causing those nearby to occasionally turn their heads to catch a clearer breath. The most constant sound, however, was the soft and steady whir of a spinning wheel, a sound as regular as a heartbeat, accompanied by the gentle thud and slide of a wooden loom from the corner where the light from a small window was best. This was the domestic system, an entire world of manufacturing contained within the four walls of a family home.
The entire process of making cloth began not in the cottage, but in the fields, with the shearing of sheep. The raw fleece arrived in great bundles, feeling greasy and springy to the touch. This texture came from lanolin, a natural oil in the wool that had to be washed out, a task often done by children in a nearby stream with harsh soap made from animal fat and ash. Once cleaned and dried, the wool was ready for carding. This was a crucial step, involving a pair of wooden paddles covered in wire bristles. A worker would take a clump of wool and brush it between the two carders over and over, until all the tangled fibers were aligned in the same direction. The result was a soft, airy roll of wool called a sliver, ready for the spinner. Each sliver was a testament to patient, repetitive work, a physical alignment of natural material in preparation for the next stage. The spinning wheel itself was a marvel of simple mechanics, powered entirely by the human body. A woman, often the mother or eldest daughter of the household, would sit before it, her foot rhythmically pressing a pedal called a treadle. This motion turned the large wheel, which was connected by a drive band to a smaller part called the flyer. Her hands performed a delicate, coordinated dance. With one hand, she would carefully draw out fibers from the wool sliver, feeding them toward the spindle. With the other, she would guide the emerging thread, ensuring it had just the right amount of twist. Too little twist, and the yarn would be weak. Too much, and it would be brittle and hard. The spinning wheel allowed her to do two things at once: drawing out the fibers and twisting them into a strong, continuous yarn, which was then automatically wound onto a bobbin. The materials themselves dictated the pace and quality of the work. Different breeds of sheep produced wools with distinct properties. Long, coarse wool was suitable for sturdy blankets or rugs, while the finer, softer wool from other breeds was reserved for clothing. The colors available were limited to what nature could provide. Dyers used plants gathered from the surrounding countryside to create their palette. The roots of the madder plant produced a range of reds and oranges, while the leaves of the woad plant, after a long and smelly fermentation process, yielded a deep, rich blue. Yellows came from a plant called weld. These natural dyes produced beautiful, if sometimes inconsistent, colors that were an integral part of the finished cloth's character, tying it directly to the landscape from which it came. This entire system of production was coordinated not by a factory owner, but by a traveling merchant known as a clothier. He was the central hub in a decentralized network of labor. One might see him on horseback, navigating the muddy lanes that connected the scattered cottages, his saddlebags filled with raw wool. He would deliver the raw materials to one family and weeks later return to collect the spun yarn. This yarn would then be taken to another cottage, that of a weaver, to be made into cloth. The clothier's account book, filled with names and tallies of weight and length, was the only central record of this widespread enterprise. This arrangement offered families a degree of independence. They worked from their own homes and could, to some extent, set their own hours around farming and family duties. However, this independence came with significant challenges. The quality of the yarn or cloth could vary greatly from one cottage to the next, depending on the skill and diligence of the family. Production was entirely dependent on the rhythms of daylight and the seasons. During the long, dark winter months, work would slow considerably, as families could only afford a few precious candles to light their tasks. A simple accident, such as a snapped thread on the loom or a broken part on the spinning wheel, could bring a family's work to a complete halt, stopping their income until a repair could be made. There was a constant vulnerability to the simple frailties of life and the limitations of their tools. Perhaps the greatest challenge within this system was a fundamental imbalance, a production bottleneck that dictated the lives of everyone involved. A single weaver at his loom could use up yarn far faster than a single spinner could produce it. Historical accounts and economic records from the period suggest that it took the work of anywhere from 4 to 10 spinners to supply enough yarn to keep one weaver busy full-time. This meant that weavers often found themselves idle waiting for more thread. The constant demand for yarn created a pressure that was felt in every cottage, a silent, persistent push for more speed and greater output from the spinners who sat at their wheels hour after hour. This constant need for more yarn created a world where every member of the family had a role. The youngest children might be tasked with the initial washing and sorting of the wool. Older children would learn the rhythmic work of carding, preparing the fibers for their mother at the spinning wheel. The father was often the weaver, the one who performed the final, most complex task of turning threads into fabric. The entire household functioned as a single, interconnected unit of production, its fortunes rising and falling together. The income from the clothier was not a wage for an individual, but a payment for the collective labor of the family. The weaver's work was the culmination of this entire process. Sitting at his large wooden loom, he would operate it with his hands and feet. With his feet, he pressed pedals that raised and lowered different sets of warp threads. The long threads stretched tightly on the frame. This created a gap, called the shed. With one hand, he would throw a shuttle, a small wooden device carrying the weft thread through this gap. Then he would catch it with his other hand, press the new thread firmly into place with a heavy bar called a beater, change the pedals with his feet, and throw the shuttle back the other way. It was a physically demanding and loud process, the steady thud, thud, thud of the beater marking the slow, methodical creation of new cloth. Life inside these cottages was shaped by the tools and the work. The low ceilings and small windows were designed to conserve heat, but they also meant that weavers and spinners had to lean in closely to see their work clearly, their eyes straining in the dim light. The floors were often packed earth or rough stone, cold underfoot in the winter. The family cooked, ate, slept, and worked in the same small space, the air filled with the intermingled scents of cooking food, peat smoke, and the lanolin from the wool. It was a life of close quarters, where the boundaries between home and workplace were entirely non-existent. When the clothier returned, he would inspect the finished cloth carefully, running his hands over the surface to check for inconsistencies in the weave or variations in the thickness of the yarn. A well-made piece would fetch a good price, but a flawed one might be rejected or paid for at a lower rate, a serious blow to a family's budget. The clothier would make a note in his ledger, pay the family in coin, and then load the heavy bolts of cloth onto his pack horse. From there, the cloth would travel to larger market towns, where it would be further processed, perhaps fulled, a process of beating and cleaning it to make it thicker, and then sold, eventually making its way to London or even to ports for export. This entire system, romanticized by some as a golden age of craft, was fundamentally limited by the power of human and animal muscle. The speed of production was the speed of a spinner's hands and feet. The amount of goods that could be moved was limited by what a horse could carry. The entire economic world was built on a foundation of biological energy, a direct conversion of food and fodder into physical labor and finished goods. The output of a whole region was simply the sum of thousands of individual small-scale efforts, each one vulnerable to sickness, accident, or a simple spell of bad weather.
Scholars looking back at this period see not a world that was static, but one that was filled with hidden pressures and inherent inefficiencies. The constant shortage of yarn was not just an inconvenience, it was a powerful economic incentive waiting for a solution. The decentralized nature of the work made quality control a persistent problem for the clothiers, who dreamed of more reliable methods. The cottage system, for all its charms, contained within its very structure the seeds of its own transformation. It was a world perfectly balanced on the edge of a monumental shift, a world where the quiet whir of the spinning wheel was about to be answered by the roar of a machine. These dependencies, of weaver upon spinner, of family upon clothier, of an entire industry upon the energy of living muscle, reveal a fundamental pattern in the history of work. Such intricate systems, balanced on human skill and natural limits, often build up pressures that can only be released by a profound technological breakthrough. The familiar rhythm of life inside the low-beamed English cottage had begun to change. The gentle sounds of domestic work, once as predictable as the rising sun, were now accompanied by a restless observation. A man named John Kay, himself a maker of looms, would stand for hours watching the slow, careful process of weaving. He was a craftsman observing his own craft, but his eyes saw something other than tradition. They saw wasted motion. His gaze followed the wooden shuttle, the small device that carries the weft thread, as it was passed by hand from one side of the broadcloth to the other. 2 weavers were needed for the widest cloths, their arms stretching in a clumsy, time-consuming exchange. A conflict was visible in his posture, a deep respect for the ancient skill warring with an impatient desire for a more logical, more efficient way. This internal debate gave way to a tangible solution in 1733 with his invention of the flying shuttle. The technical process was remarkably simple, yet its consequences were immense. Kay mounted the shuttle on wheels and placed it within a track. He then connected strings to small hammers at either end of that track. Now, a single weaver with a sharp pull of a cord could send the shuttle flying from one side of the loom to the other on its own. The old soft thud-thud of the shuttle being caught by hand was replaced by a series of sharp, decisive sounds. A pull, a clack as the shuttle shot across, a beat of the reed to tighten the weave, and then another pull and clack. This was a new and faster music, a mechanical heartbeat that allowed one person to do the work of 2, and to do it at a much greater speed. Such an increase in weaving speed immediately created a profound imbalance within the household economy. The carefully balanced system of family labor, where the output of several spinners was just enough to supply one weaver, was thrown into disarray. A weaver with a flying shuttle could now consume yarn far faster than his wife and children could produce it on their single spinning wheels. This technical improvement in one area created a severe bottleneck in another. The demand for thread became insatiable, and the pressure on the spinners grew with every yard of cloth the new loom produced. It was a problem born directly from a solution, a challenge that rippled from the weaver's bench to the spinner's stool, disrupting a dynamic that had existed for centuries. Responding to this very pressure was a weaver and carpenter from Lancashire named James Hargreaves. He understood the yarn shortage not as a distant economic issue, but as a daily frustration. The story, perhaps simplified over time but rooted in truth, tells of him observing a traditional spinning wheel that had been knocked over. As the wheel lay on its side, he saw the spindle continue to turn, now vertically instead of horizontally. From this simple observation, a powerful idea took shape. He envisioned a machine where one large hand-cranked wheel could turn not one, but multiple spindles, all standing upright in a row. His creation, the spinning jenny, was still powered entirely by human muscle and built of wood, designed to fit within the confines of a cottage. Yet it represented a monumental leap in productivity. The mechanical process of the jenny allowed a single worker, usually a woman, to spin several threads at once. The operator would turn the large wheel with their right hand, which rotated all the spindles simultaneously. With their left hand, they would control a sliding carriage that drew out the fibers from the rovings, the thick ropes of carded wool. Once the threads were drawn to the desired thinness, the carriage was pushed back in, and the freshly spun yarn was wound onto the bobbins. The first version had 8 spindles, effectively multiplying the spinner's output by 8. Later models would have 16 or more. The materials were simple, mostly timber and some metal fittings, but the organization of those materials changed the very mathematics of textile production. However, this new machine, designed to solve the yarn shortage, was not welcomed by all. It created a surplus of yarn, but it also created a deep and abiding fear among the community of hand spinners. Theirs was a skill passed down through generations, and the jenny threatened to make it obsolete overnight. This anxiety was not abstract, it was a direct threat to their livelihood. This resistance to the new technology is well documented in historical accounts. In 1768, a group of spinners, seeing their work and wages endangered, broke into Hargreaves's home and smashed his new machines to pieces. Their actions were not born of ignorance, but of a desperate attempt to protect their value and their place in the economic order of their community. This conflict highlights a central question in the study of this period. Was change driven purely by the logic of the inventions themselves, a concept scholars sometimes call technological determinism? Or was the path of progress shaped by social forces, such as the market's demand for more cloth and the workers' resistance to machines that devalued their skills? The story of the flying shuttle and the spinning jenny suggests a more complex reality. Kay's shuttle, while efficient, was adopted slowly at first, its spread hampered by the very yarn shortage it created. Hargreaves's jenny, in turn, only became widespread because the demand for yarn from those shuttle weavers was so great. The two inventions worked together like a ratchet, clicking the industry forward one step at a time. The faster shuttle created a crisis for yarn, and the multi-spindle jenny solved that crisis. But in doing so, it established a new precedent, that a single worker equipped with a machine could now outproduce many of their neighbors. This fundamentally altered the organization of labor, shifting the focus from the skill of the individual's hands to the mechanical efficiency of the tool they operated. It was the beginning of a long and often difficult transition from a world of augmented craft to one of true mechanization. These early machines were still contained within the domestic system. They were made of wood and powered by people, small enough to fit alongside the hearth and the cooking pot. Yet they planted the seeds of a much larger transformation. They demonstrated that production bottlenecks could be overcome with mechanical ingenuity. And they proved that the output of a human being could be multiplied many times over. The sounds of the cottage were changing. The sharp clack of the shuttle and the collective whir of the Jenny's spindles were now part of the daily soundscape. These were the first stirrings of a new age. The social fabric was stretched thin by these innovations. A weaver might see his income rise, but only at the cost of placing immense strain on his family or neighbors to supply him with thread. A family that adopted a spinning jenny might prosper, but they risked the anger of others in the village who saw their own livelihoods disappearing. The new machines created winners and losers, not just in a distant market, but within the close-knit communities of the countryside. The anxieties were personal, rooted in the fear that a lifetime of skill could be rendered worthless by a clever arrangement of wood and wire. This era was marked by a constant push and pull. Each innovation was both a solution and a new problem, a pattern that would repeat itself with increasing speed. The demand for cloth was the force pulling technology forward, while the physical limits of human and material resources were the friction holding it back. It was in this dynamic space that the next great changes would take root, moving production out of the quiet cottages and into a new kind of workplace, driven by a power greater than human muscle. The challenges were no longer just about the speed of a single weaver or spinner. The very materials of invention began to hint at future directions. While early jennies were made of wood, the stress of their moving parts caused them to wear out quickly. A need for more durable components, for stronger and more precisely made parts, began to grow. This, in turn, put pressure on carpenters, blacksmiths, and metalworkers to improve their own crafts. The web of cause and effect was expanding, linking the weaver's cottage to the woodworker's shop and the ironmonger's forge in new and intricate ways. The entire system of craft production was being tested by the speed of its own cleverest creations. Such early experiments with mechanization reveal the delicate balance of the pre-industrial world and how quickly it could be unsettled. One invention did not simply replace an old method. It sent shockwaves through the entire network of labor, family, and community. These first machines, small and human-powered as they were, demonstrated a powerful and disruptive new principle, that the limits of production were no longer defined solely by the skill and endurance of human hands. The incremental advances of the flying shuttle and the spinning jenny had solved one problem only to create another. While these human-powered machines increased output, they remained bound by the limits of muscle and bone, fitting uneasily within the old world of cottage work. For a true leap forward, a new source of power was needed, one that did not tire, did not sleep, and did not depend on the strength of a single person. The search for this power led away from the scattered villages and into the wilder parts of the country, to the river valleys of the Pennine Hills, where water flowed with dependable force. It was here that a different kind of vision began to take shape, one not of improving a tool, but of building a new world around a machine. This new vision belonged to a man named Richard Arkwright, a wig maker and entrepreneur from Preston. He was not a weaver or a spinner by trade, but an outsider with a keen eye for opportunity and an unyielding ambition. His character can be seen not in his words, but in his methodical actions as he surveyed the landscape along the River Derwent in a remote Derbyshire valley. He walked the riverbank, his gaze measuring the fall of the land and the speed of the current. He was not looking for a plot for a cottage, but for a source of relentless energy. The constant rush of the water was the dominant sound, a sound of ceaseless motion that promised to turn spindles faster than any human foot ever could. Where others saw a simple river, Arkwright saw the engine for a new kind of industry. The result of his search was Cromford Mill, a structure that marked a decisive break from the past. At its heart was the water wheel, a colossal wooden construction with massive paddles designed to catch the full force of the river's flow. The technical process was both simple in concept and complex in execution. As the river pushed against the paddles, it turned the great wheel on its central axle. This axle, a huge beam of timber, entered the mill itself, where a system of cast iron gears took its slow, powerful rotation and converted it into much faster motion. From these main gears, a series of vertical and horizontal shafts ran the length of the building, and from these shafts, leather belts dropped down to power the individual machines on each floor. This system provided a level of torque and continuous motion that human muscle could never hope to replicate. The sound inside the mill was entirely different from the gentle thud of a hand loom. It was a deafening, impersonal roar of grinding gears and slapping belts, a constant reminder that the power source was not human. The building itself reflected this new scale. Its walls were not of timber and plaster, but of sturdy, locally quarried stone, designed to contain the vibrations of the machinery. The internal frame was made of massive timber beams, and the critical gears were of durable cast iron, a material just beginning to show its industrial potential. It was a structure built for permanence and power, a fortress of production. This centralization of power demanded a revolutionary change in labor organization. The independent rhythm of cottage life was impossible here. Instead, Arkwright required a workforce that moved to the rhythm of the water wheel. He recruited entire families, many of them women and children, whose small hands were considered ideal for tending the delicate cotton threads. Workers no longer set their own hours, dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. Their day was now governed by the factory bell, which summoned them to long shifts, often lasting 12 to 13 hours. Inside the mill, the division of labor was absolute. A young apprentice might spend their entire day walking back and forth along a row of machines, watching for the inevitable snap of a thread and quickly tying it back together. This new system was profoundly efficient, but also profoundly alienating. A worker was no longer a weaver who understood the entire process from fleece to cloth. They were a piecer or a doffer, the person who removed full bobbins of yarn. Their single, repetitive task was performed under the watchful eye of an overseer, whose job was to ensure the pace never slackened. Fines could be issued for lateness, for talking, or for any mistake that slowed production. This was the birth of the factory system, a disciplined, hierarchical structure designed to maximize the output of the unceasing machines. Historical records, including Arkwright's own rulebooks, document this strict new code of industrial conduct. One of the greatest challenges Arkwright faced was not technical, but human. The Derwent Valley was sparsely populated, and local people were farmers and lead miners, completely unused to the disciplined indoor labor the mill required. They were not inclined to give up their independence for the factory bell. Arkwright's solution to this problem was as ambitious as the mill itself. He concluded that if he could not find a workforce, he would have to build one. Thus, his vision expanded from constructing a factory to creating an entire community designed to serve it. This was an early and quite literal example of a company town.
He built rows of sturdy stone cottages for his workers, superior to many of the hovels common at the time. He also constructed a church, a market, and a pub to create a complete, self-contained village. By providing housing, he could attract families from far and wide, and by being their landlord, he could exert a remarkable degree of control over their lives. This system, documented in the town's layout and rental agreements, ensured a stable supply of labor tied directly to the mill. If a worker was dismissed from the factory, their family would also lose its home, a powerful incentive for compliance and hard work. Another significant challenge was the river itself. While powerful, the River Derwent was also unpredictable, prone to flooding in the winter rains and running low during dry summer months. A factory that depended entirely on its flow could be brought to a standstill by the whims of nature. To solve this, sophisticated water management systems were engineered. A whir, which is a low dam, was built across the river to create a higher, more stable water level. From this, a long channel called a mill race diverted a controlled amount of water directly to the wheel. A large mill pond was also dug to act as a reservoir, storing water to ensure a constant supply even when the river was low. These feats of civil engineering demonstrated a new desire to control and regulate the natural world for industrial purposes. The move to water power irrevocably changed the landscape of production. By concentrating machinery in a single building, the factory system shifted manufacturing from countless scattered homes into centralized locations. This, in turn, led to the creation of the first industrial towns, like Cromford, which grew up around the mills. These new settlements were entirely dependent on the factory for their existence, their daily life and physical layout dictated by the needs of production. This model would be replicated across the north of England and beyond, transforming rural valleys into centers of industry.
Slow pace. This transformation brings us to one of the enduring scholarly debates surrounding figures like Richard Arkwright.
Was he a brilliant innovator who created wealth, efficiency, and employment on a new scale? Or was he a ruthless exploiter who pioneered a system of labor control that stripped workers of their autonomy and subjected them to harsh, dangerous conditions? Period documents offer evidence for both interpretations. Parliamentary reports from the time detail the long hours and difficult conditions faced by factory workers, particularly children. Yet, mill records also show that Arkwright paid his workers regularly and provided housing that was, for the era, of a decent standard. He was a complex figure who embodied the contradictions of his time. His methods were often harsh, yet they laid the groundwork for a system of mass production that would eventually raise living standards for many. There is no simple verdict on his legacy. Some historians view him as the father of the factory system, a visionary who understood the potential of combining technology, capital, and a disciplined workforce. Others see him as a symbol of the exploitation that accompanied early industrialization, a man whose fortune was built on the grueling labor of others. This careful examination of the shift to water power reveals the profound social and environmental forces that were unleashed. It was a moment when technology became too large to fit inside the home, demanding new buildings, new forms of labor, and even new communities to support it. The relentless turning of the water wheel set in motion a new kind of society, one organized around the factory clock and the continuous flow of production. This exploration into the origins of the factory system illuminates the broader principles of centralization and control that continue to influence how societies organize work and life to this day. To understand the next great leap, one must leave the riverbanks and descend into the earth, deep into the tin and copper mines of early 18th century Cornwall. Here, far below the surface, the world shrinks to the small circle of light cast by a tallow candle. The only sounds are the steady drip of water from unseen cracks in the rock, the sharp ring of a pickaxe striking a mineral vein, and the low groan of timber beams straining under the weight of the world. Movement is a constant effort, and with every breath, a person can taste the fine metallic dust that coats every surface. This was a place of immense wealth, but also of a constant creeping threat that defined all work and limited all ambition. That ever-present threat was water. The very geology of the region, fractured and porous, allowed underground springs and surface drainage to seep relentlessly into the mine shafts. As miners pushed deeper in pursuit of richer veins of ore, they inevitably sank below the natural water table, and the seepage became a flood. The central problem was not finding the tin or copper, but keeping the lower galleries, the most profitable sections of the mine, from filling with water. Every day was a battle against the Earth's own circulation, a struggle fought with simple tools and living muscle, and it was a battle the miners were slowly losing, yard by precious yard. Early methods for drainage were direct and exhausting.
Teams of men would work in relays, passing leather buckets up a chain from the dark flooded bottom, a process that required dozens of workers just to keep one small area workable. A slight improvement came with the horse-powered whim, which was a large rotating drum wrapped with rope, turned by horses walking in a circle on the surface. This device could lift much larger buckets, but the strength of the animals was finite, and the hemp ropes would stretch and fray in the perpetual dampness, creating a constant risk of snapping. Some mines were fortunate enough to be dug into the side of a hill, allowing for the construction of an adit, a gently sloping horizontal tunnel to drain water away by gravity. But this solution was entirely dependent on geography and became useless once the mine workings went below the level of the adit's exit.
The materials available for this struggle were fundamental and strained to their limits. The tunnels were supported by massive wooden beams, which became slick with moisture and slowly rotted in the damp, mineral-rich environment, requiring constant inspection and replacement. The iron heads of the pickaxes and hammers, though durable, would wear down against the hard granite and had to be regularly hauled to the surface for a blacksmith to reforge. Even the coal, which was becoming the essential fuel for homes and forges across Britain, was itself often trapped in mines that were flooding. The very resource needed for heat and industry was being held hostage by the same problem that plagued the tin and copper mines, creating a widespread and urgent need for a new kind of power. This persistent challenge was well known to a man named Thomas Newcomen, an ironmonger from Dartmouth who sold tools and supplies to these very miners. He did not need to read reports. He saw the struggle firsthand in the tired faces of the men and the exhausted bodies of the horses. His motivation seems to have been a direct response to a community crisis he witnessed daily. Working with his partner, a plumber named John Calley, Newcomen spent over a decade experimenting, trying to harness a force that was poorly understood at the time: the power of steam. What they developed was not elegant or efficient, but it was immensely powerful, a machine that would come to be called the atmospheric engine. The process of its operation was a marvel of practical engineering, a cycle of steam and cold that translated into raw force. First, a large boiler, tended constantly, produced a great quantity of low-pressure steam. This steam was piped into a tall, open-topped cylinder, where it pushed a large piston upwards. At the very top of the piston stroke, a valve was opened, and a spray of cold water was injected directly into the cylinder. This sudden cooling caused the steam inside to condense back into a small amount of water, creating a near vacuum. The ordinary pressure of the air outside the cylinder, now unopposed, would then force the piston down with tremendous power. This powerful downstroke was the engine's working motion. This entire assembly was connected to a massive wooden beam, perfectly balanced like a giant seesaw. The piston was attached to one end of this rocking beam. The other end was connected to a long, heavy rod that descended deep into the mine shaft, connected to a pump. As the piston was forced down by the atmosphere, it pulled its end of the beam down, which in turn lifted the pump rod, drawing a great volume of water up from the flooded galleries. The slow, rhythmic, seesawing motion of the enormous beam against the sky became a new feature of the mining landscape, a sign of a new kind of power at work.
The machine was like a slow, breathing giant, its every breath expelling gallons of the mine's unwanted water. Historical accounts indicate the first successful engine was erected near Dudley Castle in Staffordshire in 1712, a location chosen because it was a coal mine. This detail is critically important. The Newcomen engine was wildly inefficient, consuming vast amounts of coal to keep its boiler hot, especially since the main cylinder was cooled on every stroke. For a tin mine in Cornwall, the cost of transporting that much coal would have been ruinous. But at the head of a coal mine, a colliery, the fuel was essentially free. The engine could consume mountains of low-grade coal that was otherwise unsellable, turning waste into work. This points to a key concept in how technology often develops. The atmospheric engine was not a universal solution. It was born to fill a very specific technological niche. Its sole purpose was to pump water, and it could only do so economically where fuel was abundant and cheap. It was too large, too inefficient, and its motion was too jerky to power the delicate machinery of a textile mill. For decades, its use was almost entirely confined to dewatering coal, tin, and copper mines. It did not immediately create new industries, but it saved existing ones from drowning, allowing miners to push their shafts deeper than ever thought possible. Consequently, the impact on mining was profound. With the constant threat of flooding managed by these tireless engines, mine owners could invest in deeper shafts with greater confidence, unlocking vast new reserves of minerals and coal. This, in turn, fueled a feedback loop. More coal could be mined, which made it cheaper to build and run more engines to drain even more mines. The machine was a direct answer to a geological problem, using the Earth's own ancient carbon to fight back against the Earth's own water. It was not yet the engine that would drive the Industrial Revolution, but it was the necessary first step, solving the fundamental problem of power at its source. The partnership that created it also speaks to the nature of innovation during this period. Newcomen was a practical craftsman, an ironmonger who understood metals and tools. Cowley was a plumber, an expert in pipes and valves and the movement of water. Their creation was not born from abstract scientific theory in a university laboratory, but from hands-on skill and a deep practical understanding of a real-world problem. It was a mechanical solution devised by mechanics, built from the common materials of the day: iron, brass, wood, and stone. Yet, its very success highlighted its own limitations. The rocking up and down motion was perfect for a pump, but could not easily turn a wheel. The immense consumption of coal kept it tethered to the pit head. And the constant cycle of heating and cooling the same cylinder was a source of great waste, a puzzle that intrigued observers and instrument makers across the country. They could see the raw power of the machine, but they could also see the room for improvement. The giant was strong, but it was clumsy and hungry. Someone would need to teach it to be more refined, more efficient, before its power could be truly unleashed from the mines and put to work in the factories that were beginning to stir. The slow, steady oscillation of the Newcomen engine's great beam reveals how a specific, pressing need can give rise to a revolutionary, if imperfect, solution. It shows that the first steps in a great transformation are often clumsy, designed not for universal application, but as a direct response to a single, overwhelming challenge. This powerful, coal-hungry machine, created to solve the simple problem of water in a mine, was the ancestor of all that was to come, the first thudding heartbeat of a new mechanical age. The world of industry does not always advance with the roar of a furnace or the rush of a river. Sometimes it moves forward in the quiet of a university workshop, guided by the patient hands of a single person. In such a place at the University of Glasgow, surrounded by the metallic scent of brass filings and lubricating oil, a young instrument maker named James Watt was given a task. He was to repair a small demonstration model of a Newcomen steam engine, a machine used in the university's natural philosophy classes. His character can be seen in his methods. He did not simply fix the broken part, but instead he carefully disassembled the entire mechanism, his fingers tracing the paths where steam flowed and condensed, his posture thoughtful as he watched its clumsy, wasteful cycle. This small model, like its full-sized cousins pumping water from the mines, operated on a simple principle, yet it possessed a deep flaw. First, a boiler created steam, which was let into a cylinder, pushing a piston up. Then, a jet of cold water was sprayed directly into that same cylinder. This cold spray caused the steam to condense back into water, creating a vacuum that pulled the piston back down. It was this downward stroke that did the work of pumping. However, as Watt observed its jerky, inefficient motion, he realized the problem was fundamental. The process was a constant battle of temperatures within a single space. The core inefficiency lay in the very metal of the cylinder. It had to be hot to allow the steam to expand and do its work. But then it had to be made cold instantly to create the vacuum. Accounts from the period reveal that a Newcomen engine used more energy reheating the cylinder for the next stroke than it did in actually moving the piston. It was a tremendous waste of heat and fuel, a problem that kept the engine tethered to the coal mines, where fuel was cheap and plentiful. For the engine to become something more, for it to be used anywhere else, this essential flaw had to be overcome. During his methodical work, a profound analytical breakthrough occurred. Watt reasoned that if the steam was the thing that needed to be cooled, there was no logical requirement for the cooling to happen inside the main working cylinder. The solution, he realized, was to draw the steam away into a separate, constantly cool vessel for condensation. By adding this second part, a separate condenser, the main cylinder could remain hot at all times. This single change, born from quiet observation and logical deduction, was not just a minor improvement. It was a complete rethinking of the engine's thermal dynamics, promising a level of efficiency that was previously unimaginable. An idea, however brilliant, is only as good as its execution. Watt was a gifted instrument maker, but he was not a wealthy industrialist. He lacked the funds and the facilities to build a full-scale engine based on his new design. This is where a different kind of visionary enters the picture: Matthew Boulton. Boulton was the owner of the Soho manufactory near Birmingham, a facility that was already famous for producing high-quality metal goods, from buttons to silverware. He was a practical-minded entrepreneur who immediately grasped the immense commercial potential of Watt's more efficient engine, seeing a future powered by steam. Slow pace. Bolton's Soho manufactory represented a new form of labor organization, different from the mills or mines. It was a center of high-skilled labor, a gathering of the finest artisans and metalworkers of the day. These were not simply laborers performing a repetitive task. They were craftsmen capable of the precision work needed to turn Watt's complex diagrams into working metal parts. Bolton provided not only the capital, the money needed for development, but also this essential pool of skilled workers who understood the properties of metal and the art of shaping it with exacting accuracy. It was in this environment that Watt's theoretical designs could begin to take physical form. Even with this partnership, the primary challenge quickly became one of materials and manufacturing capability. The separate condenser made the engine far more sensitive to imperfections. In a Newcomen engine, small leaks were tolerable. But in Watt's design, the vacuum was so crucial that any gap between the piston and the cylinder wall would allow air to seep in, destroying the power of the stroke. The iron cylinders of the day were cast and then scoured smooth on the inside, but they were never perfectly round. This single technical problem threatened to make the entire invention a commercial failure. The solution came from an unexpected quarter, from an ironmaster named John Wilkinson, who had perfected a new machine for a completely different purpose: making cannons. Wilkinson had developed a new type of boring machine where the drill bit was held steady, and the entire cannon casting was rotated around it. This method produced a barrel that was remarkably straight and true. Wilkinson, a man who famously had so much faith in iron that he planned to be buried in an iron coffin, realized his invention could solve Watt's problem. The same precision needed to ensure a cannonball flew true was exactly what was needed to create a perfectly sealed steam cylinder. This combination of forces was the key to unlocking the steam engine's potential. The solution was not a single person, but a partnership of three distinct elements: Watt's scientific mind, Bolton's business sense and capital, and Wilkinson's manufacturing capability. Historical accounts detail the years of failed experiments and financial struggles they endured. They faced constant technical problems, creating perfect seals with materials like leather and tallow, and ensuring parts were durable enough to withstand the higher pressures. It was an early and powerful example of the inventor, investor, manufacturer triangle that would drive so much of the innovation to come. Once these manufacturing hurdles were cleared, the result was an engine of astonishing power and efficiency. A Bolton and Watt engine could produce the same amount of power as a Newcomen engine while consuming less than a third of the coal. This dramatic reduction in fuel cost was the single most important factor in its success. Suddenly, it became economically viable to build a steam engine far away from a coal mine. Factories no longer needed to be built beside fast-flowing rivers. They could be built in cities, near ports, or wherever labor and raw materials were most convenient. Yet, there was one final, crucial step needed to transform the steam engine from a magnificent pump into a true universal power source. Watt's engine, like Newcomen's, still produced a simple up and down, back and forth motion. While perfect for pumping water, this was not useful for turning the machinery of a factory. To solve this, Watt developed an ingenious system of gears called the Sun and Planet gear. This device, a clever workaround to avoid a patent held by a rival, converted the simple up and down pumping motion into the smooth, continuous rotation needed to drive shafts, belts, and the countless wheels of a textile mill or ironworks. Period documents and scholarly analysis often debate whether Watt was a lone genius who single-handedly invented the modern steam engine. A wider view suggests he was a brilliant synthesizer, a product of a vibrant intellectual and technical environment in Scotland and England. He built upon the work of Newcomen, relied on the scientific principles of his university colleagues, and depended entirely on the manufacturing advances of men like Wilkinson. His true genius lay in his ability to see the core inefficiency of an existing system and combine disparate ideas and technologies into a new, vastly more powerful whole.
With the addition of rotary motion, the transformation was complete. The steam engine was no longer just a tool for a specific problem in a specific industry. It had become a universal prime mover, a source of power that was reliable, tireless, and could be placed almost anywhere. It was now ready to be harnessed to the looms of the textile factories, the hammers of the iron forges, and the wheels of the machines that would build a new world. These intricate connections between scientific insight, financial investment, and manufacturing skill help to answer enduring questions about how a single invention could so completely reshape the possibilities of an entire age. The work of James Watt and Matthew Boulton provided the world with a new, efficient source of power. But an engine, no matter how clever, is only as strong as the material from which it is made. The precision cylinders and sturdy pistons demanded by these new steam machines required vast quantities of high-quality iron. This need shifted the focus of innovation to a different kind of landscape, away from the workshops of Glasgow and into the deep, wooded valleys of Shropshire. Here, in a place called Colebrook Dale, the very earth seemed to be burning. At night, the sky above the valley did not darken completely, but held a persistent, deep red glow, a reflection from the furnaces that lined the River Severn. The air itself had a sharp, metallic taste, and a constant, low roar echoed from the hillsides, a sound that spoke of immense heat and relentless production. Among the men who worked in this transformed valley was a Quaker ironmaster named Abraham Darby I. He was a quiet, observant man, and his gaze often fell upon the surrounding hills, which were becoming increasingly bare. The traditional method of making iron required a fuel called charcoal, which is made by slowly burning wood in a low oxygen environment. This process created a clean, hot-burning fuel perfect for smelting, but it consumed entire forests at an alarming rate. Darby could see the end of this road. As the trees vanished, the cost of charcoal soared, and the future of his ironworks became uncertain. He found himself wrestling with a fundamental problem: a growing demand for iron and a shrinking supply of the fuel needed to make it. The most obvious solution lay right beneath his feet. Coal was plentiful and cheap, but every ironmaster knew that using it directly in a furnace was a disaster. Raw coal is full of impurities, especially sulfur. When this sulfur mixed with the molten iron ore, it created a metal that was brittle and useless, a material that would crack and shatter under a blacksmith's hammer.
The challenge, as Darby saw it, was not to find a new fuel, but to purify the one that was so abundant. Through years of methodical experimentation, driven by his practical faith and business sense, he arrived at a solution that would change the world. He discovered that he first baked the coal in special ovens, driving off the impurities as thick yellow smoke. The material left behind was a hard, gray, porous substance called coke. This new fuel, coke, was the key. It burned even hotter than charcoal and contained the pure carbon needed for the chemical reaction of smelting. Darby redesigned his blast furnace, making it taller to accommodate the new fuel. The process began by loading the furnace from the top with layers of iron ore, limestone, and now coke. The limestone acted as a material known as a flux, which binds to the impurities in the ore, separating them out. At the base of the furnace, great bellows, powered by a massive water wheel, forced a continuous blast of air into the fiery heart of the mixture. The sound was like a constant gale, feeding a fire that reached temperatures high enough to turn rock into a glowing liquid. This intense heat, achievable with coke, produced a steady stream of molten iron, more uniform and in greater quantities than was ever possible with charcoal. The molten metal that flowed from the base of the furnace was guided into sandy channels on the workshop floor. The main channel was called a sow, and smaller channels branching off to the sides were called pigs, because they looked like a mother pig nursing her young. This gave the raw cast iron its common name, pig iron. While Darby's process solved the fuel crisis and allowed for a massive increase in iron production, the material itself had limitations. This pig iron was very rich in carbon, which made it strong when compressed, like a pillar holding up a roof, but brittle when stretched or bent. It could be cast into pots, cannons, or parts for stationary engines, but it could not be hammered into the tough, flexible shapes needed for tools, chains, or the high-pressure components of more advanced machines. The challenge of turning brittle pig iron into a more versatile material was taken up by another innovator, a man named Henry Court. He developed a process called puddling. In a specially designed reverberatory furnace, the pig iron was melted in a shallow hearth, separate from the fuel source. This design allowed the hot gases to pass over the metal without contaminating it. A worker, known as a puddler, would then undertake one of the most physically demanding jobs of the entire industrial age. Using a long iron rod, he would reach into the furnace and stir the molten, bubbling mass. His body would be soaked with sweat in moments, and his eyes had to be shielded from the intense white glare of the liquid metal. The puddler's task was to agitate the molten iron, exposing it to the air passing through the furnace. This action caused the excess carbon and other impurities within the iron to burn off in spectacular fashion, erupting in small, bright flashes. As the carbon content decreased, the melting point of the iron rose, and the metal would thicken, becoming a spongy, glowing ball. The puddler had to use all his strength and skill to gather these balls of purified iron, now known as wrought iron, and pull them from the furnace. These glowing masses were then taken to a powerful water or steam-driven hammer that would pound them, squeezing out the remaining impurities, known as slag, in a shower of sparks. This two-step process
Darby's coke-fired furnace to mass-produce pig iron, and Cort's puddling method to refine it into high-quality wrought iron unleashed the true potential of the iron industry. It was no longer bound by the availability of wood, allowing production to grow on a scale previously unimaginable. The cost of iron fell dramatically, and this strong, malleable material became the essential building block for the new age. The rails for the coming railways, the plates for steel-hulled ships, the gears and frames for factory machinery, and the precisely bored cylinders for Watt's steam engines were all now possible thanks to this revolution in metal. This fundamental shift from a wood-based fuel to a coal-based one marks a critical turning point in history. Scholars of environmental history see this moment as the beginning of our modern reliance on fossil fuels. The solution to the problem of deforestation unleashed immense productive power, allowing for the construction of the machines and infrastructure that would define the industrial world. However, it also set humanity on a new course, one that drew its energy from burning carbon that had been locked underground for millions of years. The red glow over Coalbrookdale was not just the light of furnaces. It was the dawn of an era of unprecedented industrial might. The techniques developed in these iron-making valleys created a powerful feedback loop. More and better iron allowed for the construction of more efficient steam engines. These new engines could then be used to pump water from deeper coal mines and to power larger bellows for the blast furnaces, which in turn produced even more iron. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of innovation, where an advance in one sector directly fueled progress in another. The quiet, methodical work of men like Abraham Darby, driven by a simple need to overcome a material constraint, had provided the very skeleton upon which the entire body of the Industrial Revolution would be built. The legacy of these developments is written across our modern landscape, from the steel in our buildings to the bridges that span our rivers. Current historical research continues to delve into the intricate connections between these early industrial processes and their long-term environmental consequences, revealing the complex origins of our contemporary world. In the workshops of Sheffield, a city whose name was already synonymous with fine cutlery, the making of superior metal was a quiet, almost secret art. Here, the process was not one of roaring furnaces, but of careful, measured work. Inside small stone buildings, master craftsmen would take specially prepared wrought iron and place it into sealed clay pots, known as crucibles, along with a precise measure of charcoal. These pots were then heated for days in gentle furnaces, allowing the iron to slowly absorb the carbon. The final product, crucible steel, was dense, strong, and held a razor's edge, but it was made in batches of only 40 or 50 pounds. This material was reserved for the finest watch springs, the sharpest surgical tools, and the most elegant swords. Its production was far too slow and expensive for bridges or railway lines. This careful, small-scale world was about to be interrupted by a man who was not an ironmaster at all. Henry Bessemer was an inventor, a mind that moved from one problem to the next, from creating a gold-colored paint from brass powder to designing better artillery. It was this last interest, driven by the needs of the Crimean War, that set him on a new path. Military commanders needed stronger cannons, ones that could withstand the force of more powerful projectiles. The cast iron cannons of the day were prone to shattering. Bessemer, an outsider to the ancient traditions of iron and steel, looked at the molten pig iron from a furnace and saw not a finished product, but a raw material filled with impurities. He approached the challenge not as a craftsman, but as a chemist with a mechanical problem to solve. The fundamental difference between brittle cast iron and strong steel lies in a single element: carbon. Pig iron, direct from the blast furnace, is saturated with it, making it hard but inflexible. Wrought iron has had most of the carbon painstakingly beaten out of it, making it tough but soft. Steel occupies a narrow, perfect middle ground. For centuries, the only way to get there was either by adding a little carbon back into wrought iron, as the Sheffield crucible process did, or by slowly removing most of it. Bessemer had a revolutionary thought, born from a simple observation. He noticed that a blast of hot air playing over the surface of molten iron was burning away some of its carbon content. The question then formed in his mind: what if, instead of blowing air over the iron, one were to blow it directly through it? This insight led to the creation of the Bessemer converter. It was a large, pear-shaped vessel made of steel and lined with clay, capable of holding several tons of molten pig iron. Once filled, the converter was tilted, and powerful pumps forced cold air through pipes in its base, directly into the heart of the liquid metal. The result was not a gentle refinement, but a controlled, violent spectacle. A deep roar erupted from the vessel as the oxygen in the air instantly began to combine with the carbon and other impurities in the iron. A vast plume of brilliant orange flame, shot through with white-hot sparks, erupted from the converter's mouth. For 20 minutes, the chemical reaction fed itself, the temperature inside soaring far higher than any furnace could achieve. The workers shielded their faces from the intense light and the sheer force of the display. Then, as the carbon was consumed, the flame would shrink and change color, signaling the process was complete. The converter was tilted, and out poured a stream of liquid, purified metal, steel. With this astonishing process, Henry Bessemer announced to the world that he could make steel in minutes, in quantities of tons, at a fraction of the cost. He licensed his patent, and new plants were built. However, disaster soon followed. The steel produced by these new factories was often brittle and unreliable. The rails cracked, and the boilers failed. The initial excitement soured into bitter disappointment, and Bessemer's reputation was severely damaged. His process had a hidden flaw, an invisible enemy lurking in the raw materials. The spectacular blast of air burned away carbon and silicon, but it was powerless against another impurity common in British iron ore: phosphorus. Even a tiny amount of phosphorus made steel brittle when it was cold, a fatal defect for a railway track in winter. The solution came not from a mechanical engineer, but from a London police court clerk and amateur chemist named Sidney Gilchrist Thomas. Working with his cousin, Percy Gilchrist, a chemist at an ironworks, he reasoned that phosphorus was an acidic impurity. Therefore, to remove it, one needed a basic substance to react with it. Their innovation was to change the lining of the Bessemer converter.
Instead of the standard acidic clay lining, they used a basic one made of limestone and dolomite. During the violent bluing process, this basic lining acted as a chemical magnet, drawing the phosphorus out of the molten metal and into the slag, a glassy waste product that floated on the surface. This refinement, known as the basic or Thomas Gilchrist process, was the final key. It unlocked the potential of vast iron ore deposits around the world that had previously been unusable for steelmaking. This breakthrough firmly established the hierarchy of ferrous metals. Cast iron, strong when compressed, remained the material for sturdy machine bases, posts, and cooking pots. Wrought iron, strong when pulled, was still useful for chains, anchors, and decorative work. But steel, which possessed both compressive and tensile strength in great measure, was now the universal material for heavy industry. It was the ideal substance for building the modern world. Its properties meant that railway rails could be made lighter yet stronger, lasting 10 times longer than their iron counterparts. It meant that ships could be built with steel hulls, which were not only more resistant to damage, but also lighter, allowing them to carry more cargo with the same amount of fuel.
The sheer speed and scale of this transformation were breathtaking. In just a few decades, steel went from being a specialty material, costing more than silver by weight in some forms, to a bulk commodity. This dramatic drop in price and increase in availability unleashed a new wave of construction and innovation. It made possible the great steel bridges that spanned wider rivers than ever before, and the steel skeletons that allowed buildings to climb to previously unimaginable heights, giving birth to the skyscraper. The development highlights a fascinating aspect of invention. Historical accounts show that while Bessemer was patenting his process in England, an ironmaster in Kentucky named William Kelly was independently experimenting with a nearly identical method. This case of convergent evolution suggests that once the underlying scientific principles are understood and a pressing economic need exists, similar technological solutions can arise in different parts of the world almost at the same time. The new age of steel was loud, bright, and incredibly powerful. It replaced the careful tapping of the Sheffield craftsman with the volcanic roar of the converter. The change was not merely one of material, but of scale and ambition. The production of steel became the new measure of a nation's industrial might, a direct indicator of its ability to build railways, fleets, and cities. This single innovation, born from the problem of a weak cannon, ended up providing the very backbone for the next phase of industrial expansion. The patent records and engineering diagrams from this period show a world grappling with a new material, discovering its limits and its immense potential, a process of learning that continues to this day. The creation of affordable, high-quality steel was a landmark achievement, providing the essential skeleton for a new, stronger world. Yet, a strong skeleton is of little use without the arteries and veins to carry life and energy through the body. Before steel could build towering cities or fleets of powerful ships, the nation first had to be woven together with pathways of water and iron, a task that required not a single brilliant inventor, but the brute force and determination of an entire army of laborers. This immense effort began on windswept moors and in muddy valleys with the simple tools of the earth mover, the pickaxe, the shovel, and the wheelbarrow. The men who wielded these tools were a new breed known as navigators, or more commonly, navvies. They were the powerful, mobile workforce that followed the promise of high wages from one massive construction project to the next. On a bleak hillside, the scene was one of disciplined, rhythmic effort. The air carried the scent of damp clay turned over by hundreds of shovels. The only sounds were the steady scrape of metal on stone, the thud of earth hitting the inside of a wooden barrow, and the clipped commands of a foreman. Muscles and backs and arms bunched and released, a human machine carving a precise line through the rugged landscape. These were the men who would physically dig the new arteries of the nation into existence. The organization of this labor was a marvel in itself. The navvies worked in gangs, often with a strong sense of internal loyalty and rivalry. Historical accounts indicate they were paid by the amount of earth they moved, a system that encouraged immense speed and a disregard for safety. They lived in temporary shanty towns that sprang up alongside the construction path, communities with their own rules and culture, often viewed with suspicion by the settled villagers nearby. The work was incredibly dangerous. Tunnel collapses and accidents with black powder were common. But the pay was far better than any farm laborer could hope to earn, and so the supply of men was never ending. They were digging canals, the great water highways of the early industrial age. The central engineering challenge of a canal is profound in its simplicity. Water does not flow uphill. Therefore, a canal must be a perfectly level channel of water, sometimes for dozens of miles. Surveyors using basic levels and sighting poles would plot a contour line across the land, and it was the navvy's job to make that line a reality. They dug the channel, lined it with puddled clay to make it waterproof, and built up the banks, a process that required moving millions of tons of earth with nothing more than muscle power and the occasional horse-drawn cart. When the path of a canal met a hill, engineers had two choices: go around it or go through it. Going through it meant digging a tunnel, a terrifying and hazardous task. The Standedge Tunnel on the Huddersfield Narrow Canal, for example, stretches for over 3 miles, making it the longest and deepest canal tunnel in Britain. Period documents reveal that it was carved from solid rock by men working in near total darkness, their only light coming from tallow candles that struggled to burn in the stale, unhealthy air. Their breathing was often labored, and the constant dampness chilled them to the bone. But they chipped away, foot by foot, for years. The more common solution for changing elevation was far more elegant: the lock. A lock is a simple and brilliant device, essentially a water-filled elevator for boats. The process involved a section of the canal with watertight gates at each end. A boat moving uphill would enter the lock, and the lower gate would be sealed behind it. Then sluices, which are small controllable openings, would be opened from the upper level, allowing water to flow into the lock chamber by gravity. As the chamber filled, the boat would rise smoothly with the water level. Once it was level with the upper canal, the top gate would be opened and the boat could continue on its journey. To cross a valley, an even more dramatic structure was needed, the aqueduct. These were bridges made not for people or carts, but to carry water. The Pont Sicilte aqueduct in Wales remains a breathtaking example. It carries the Llangollen Canal over 100 feet above the River Dee, in a cast iron trough supported by towering stone pillars. It was a monumental achievement that showcased the growing confidence of British engineers and their mastery over the new material of cast iron, a direct product of the coke-fired furnaces at places like Coalbrookdale. Such structures were statements of power, demonstrating that no feature of the natural landscape was an insurmountable barrier to commerce. Meanwhile, while canals were revolutionizing the transport of heavy goods, a parallel transformation was happening on the roads. For centuries, British roads had been little more than muddy tracks, nearly impassable in winter. The need for faster, more reliable travel for passengers, mail, and lighter goods drove innovation. The most significant advance came from a Scottish engineer named John McAdam. He developed a new method of road construction based on careful observation and scientific principles. His approach required that roads be built with a foundation of large rocks, covered by a layer of smaller angular stones, and topped with a final surface of even smaller gravel. The genius of the macadam method, as it came to be known, was twofold. First, the angular shape of the stones, when compacted by heavy rollers, would lock together to form a solid, durable surface. Second, the road was built with a slight curve, or camber, from the center to the edges, allowing rainwater to drain away quickly into ditches on either side. This prevented the water from turning the road into mud. A macadam road was smoother, stronger, and far more resistant to weather than anything that had come before it, allowing stagecoaches to travel faster and more safely than ever. Unlike the centrally planned canals, most of these new roads were built and maintained under a system of turnpike trusts. These were private organizations granted the right by Parliament to build a stretch of road and, in return, charge a toll or fee for its use. A traveler would be stopped at a date or pike to pay the fee before continuing. This model of financing created a patchwork of well-maintained toll roads across the country, managed by local interests rather than a single national authority. It was a different solution to the same fundamental problem of knitting the country together. Together, these two networks, the slow, powerful canals and the faster, lighter roads, formed the essential infrastructure of the first phase of the Industrial Revolution. Canals were the arteries, moving the heavy blood of the new economy. A canal boat could carry 30 tons of coal with a single horse, a load that would have required 50 horses on a road. This made it economically possible for Josiah Wedgwood to ship his delicate pottery from his inland factory to the ports without breakage, and for Manchester's textile mills to receive a constant supply of coal. Roads, on the other hand, functioned as the nervous system, transmitting information, people, and finished goods with greater speed. The improved surfaces allowed for regular, scheduled mail coach services, which meant that a letter or a business order from London
could reach Manchester in a day rather than a week. This acceleration of communication and travel was just as crucial as the movement of raw materials. Historical accounts show how these new transportation networks did not just serve existing trade. They created entirely new possibilities, allowing industries to grow in places they never could have before, and binding the nation into a single interconnected market. This immense reshaping of the physical landscape was the necessary groundwork for everything that followed. By conquering the challenges of terrain, the engineers and laborers of the canal and turnpike era laid down the paths that industry would follow. Their work demonstrated a new belief in the power of human ingenuity to overcome natural obstacles. This fundamental reordering of geography in service of commerce reflects a universal human drive to master the simple yet profound constraints of distance and time. In the autumn of 1829, a field near the small Lancashire village of Rainhill became the center of a new world. This was not a place of grimy industry, but had the feel of a country fair. People gathered in great numbers, their excitement a low hum beneath the gray sky. They climbed onto wagons and stood on stone walls, all craning their necks for a better view of a strange contest. The directors of the nearly complete Liverpool and Manchester Railway had offered a prize for the best and most reliable steam locomotive. Among the hopefuls was a father and son team, George and Robert Stephenson. Observers noted the tension in their faces, the deliberate way their hands, stained with oil and coal dust, made final checks on their machine. It was an odd-looking engine, painted a bright yellow and black, with a tall, slender chimney. They called it the Rocket.
As the Stephenson's machine was moved into position, its purpose became clear. This was more than a contest. It was a public trial to prove that a machine could do what generations had believed only horses could: provide fast, reliable transport over land. The central challenge for all locomotive designers was generating enough steam, and doing so quickly. The Rocket's secret lay hidden within its boiler. Instead of one large flue passing through the water from the firebox, Robert Stephenson had fitted it with 25 copper tubes. This arrangement vastly increased the surface area where hot gas could heat the water, producing high-pressure steam far more efficiently than any design before it. It was a simple yet profound mechanical insight that would change the very pace of human life. This technical process was the heart of the machine's power. When the signal was given, the rocket began to move. It produced a sharp, rhythmic puffing sound, a noise that grew faster as the engine gained speed. This was the second great innovation, the blast pipe. This device channeled the exhaust steam from the pistons up the chimney, creating a partial vacuum. This vacuum, in turn, pulled air through the firebox, fanning the flames and making the fire burn hotter precisely when the engine was working its hardest. It was a clever, self-regulating system. The faster the rocket went, the more power it generated. The crowd, initially skeptical, began to cheer as the yellow engine reached speeds of nearly 30 miles an hour, a velocity that seemed utterly astonishing. It completed its trials with a reliability that its competitors could not match, securing the contract and proving that the age of the iron horse had truly begun. The victory at Rainhill, however, was only the first step. Building a railway was an entirely different kind of challenge, one that demanded a new level of precision in both materials and engineering. The wrought iron rails produced by the puddling process had to be of a consistent and high quality. Brittle or poorly made rails would crack under the immense pounding weight of a multi-ton locomotive. This need for durable iron created a huge demand that drove the iron industry to new heights of production. Furthermore, unlike canals, which could use locks to climb hills, a locomotive could only manage very gentle slopes. This constraint required civil engineers to plot routes with an almost fanatical attention to level ground, a task that contrasted sharply with the rougher work of canal digging. To achieve these gentle gradients, the landscape itself had to be reshaped. Armies of laborers, the same navvies who had dug the canals, were now organized to perform feats of unprecedented scale. Under the command of civil engineers like the brilliant Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who became legendary figures akin to field generals, these men cut deep trenches through hills and raised enormous embankments across valleys. Where a valley was too wide to fill, they built massive brick viaducts, such as the Sankey Viaduct on that first Liverpool to Manchester line. These structures, with their graceful arches marching across the countryside, were monuments to a new kind of industrial art, one based on calculation, durable materials, and the organization of a massive workforce. This new system required more than just physical construction. It demanded a new way of organizing time and people. With trains moving at high speeds on single tracks, scheduling became a matter of life and death. For the first time, a compelling reason existed for a town clock in Manchester to agree with one in Liverpool. This led to the creation of railway time, a standardized time based on the Greenwich Observatory that was gradually adopted across the country, replacing the patchwork of local times. In addition, a complex new labor organization was born to operate the railways. A clear hierarchy of station masters, drivers, firemen, and signal guards, all in uniform, was established. This created a disciplined workforce responsible for maintaining timetables and ensuring safety, a logistical system more complex than any commercial venture that had come before. The railway was therefore a truly transformative technology, a system of systems that altered the very fabric of society. It shrank the perception of time and space, making a journey that once took a full day by stagecoach possible in just a couple of hours. This unprecedented speed allowed people and goods to move with a freedom previously unimaginable, binding the nation together and creating truly national markets for coal, iron, and finished goods. Historical accounts from the period describe the profound change in the human perception of the landscape, which now seemed to rush past a carriage window rather than being something one moved slowly through. Of course, this transformation was not without conflict. Scholars continue to debate the full social impact of the railways. While they brought immense economic benefits and connected communities, the process of their construction was often brutal and disruptive. Laying tracks directly through established towns and cities often involved the demolition of entire neighborhoods, displacing residents with little compensation. The railway represented progress and prosperity, but it was a progress that carved its path directly through the old world, leaving both connection and dislocation in its wake. The sound of the train whistle became a daily reminder of a new, faster, more interconnected age. This new network of iron and steam did more than just move goods. It moved information and ideas at a speed that accelerated the pace of innovation itself. The very existence of the railway spurred further growth in the coal and steel industries, creating a powerful feedback loop where one technology demanded and enabled advances in another. Engineers who learned their trade building one line would move on to design another, spreading knowledge and techniques throughout the country and eventually the world. It was an engine of change in every sense of the word, powered by coal and built from the very iron it was designed to transport. The sight of the rocket puffing along its track at Rainhill was the public birth of an idea, but the vast network that followed was its true legacy. From the precise boring of a cylinder in a workshop to the meticulous survey of a route across a moor, the railway was a culmination of all the industrial arts that had been developing for a century. It required powerful engines, mass-produced iron, and sophisticated organization. These interconnected developments offer a foundational understanding of how complex technological systems are born, and how they reshape the world in their own image. To step inside a mature textile mill in Manchester during the middle of the 19th century was to enter another world, one governed by a new and relentless rhythm. The sound was the first thing to overwhelm the senses, a deafening, continuous clatter of hundreds of power looms that made spoken words impossible. Workers learned to communicate through a sharp system of hand signals and expressive gestures, their conversations conducted across the mechanical roar. The warmth in the rooms was immediate and clinging, a deliberate condition, as the humid atmosphere was maintained by steam pipes to prevent the delicate cotton threads from becoming brittle and snapping. This humidity caused clothing to feel damp and heavy, while fine cotton fibers, freed by the machines, hung in the shafts of light from the tall windows, inevitably finding their way into the throats and lungs of everyone within. This entire system of motion and sound had its heart in the basement, where a great steam engine, perhaps a descendant of James Watt's designs, worked tirelessly. Its rhythmic strokes turned a massive flywheel, which, through a series of thick leather belts, spun a primary drive shaft running the length of the building. From this main artery, more belts rose through the floors, turning overhead line shafts in each workroom. Dozens of smaller belts then dropped from these rotating shafts to power the individual machines below. The result was a forest of moving leather and spinning iron, a complex network for distributing mechanical power that replaced the single river wheel of the earlier mills. This arrangement meant the entire factory pulsed as one single interconnected machine. The organization of the labor within these walls was as systematic as the machinery itself. The journey of raw cotton through the factory perfectly illustrates the principle of the division of labor, a process where a complex craft is broken down into a series of simple, repetitive tasks. A large bale of raw, tangled cotton would arrive and be fed into the breaking and blowing rooms, where machines opened the compressed fibers and cleaned out dirt and seeds. From there, the loosened cotton moved to the carding engines. These were large machines covered in wire teeth
that combed the fibers, aligning them into a continuous soft rope called a sliver. The workers here did not need to know the entire process of cloth making. Their whole world was the feeding of the carding engine and the removal of the full cans of sliver.
Following this initial preparation, the cotton sliver was taken to be spun into thread. Here, large automated machines known as spinning mules, some stretching over 100 feet long, performed the delicate work of drawing out and twisting the fibers. A single worker, often with the help of younger assistants called piecers, would patrol a long alley between two of these machines. Their job was not to spin, but to watch. They moved constantly, their eyes scanning the hundreds of whirling spindles for a broken thread. When one snapped, they would dart in, their fingers moving with practiced speed to catch the two ends and tie them back together with a quick, precise knot. Their skill was not in creating the thread, but in maintaining the machine's continuous production. Once the bobbins were filled with thread, they were carried to the weaving shed, the source of the building's overwhelming noise. Here, rows of power looms automatically interlaced warp and weft threads at a speed no human weaver could ever match. The weaver's role, much like the spinner's, had transformed into one of supervision. A single weaver was now responsible for overseeing several looms at once. They walked back and forth, watching for the telltale snap of a thread or the moment a shuttle ran out of weft yarn. When a problem occurred, they would stop the machine, fix the issue, and restart it as quickly as possible. Their contribution measured in their ability to minimize the machinery's idle time. This entire operation was synchronized by the factory clock and enforced by the watchful eye of an overseer. The day began and ended with the sound of a bell, and any worker who was even a few minutes late would find their pay docked. The rules were strict and posted for all to see. Fines were issued for talking when it was not necessary, for leaving a machine unattended, or for producing flawed cloth. This system created a new kind of discipline, one where human life was structured not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the unceasing demands of the clockwork factory. The labor organization was no longer a family unit working at its own pace, but a large, impersonal workforce directed by managers.
As these complex machines became more common, a significant challenge arose: the problem of repair. When a part in a spinning mule or a power loom broke, the entire machine was rendered useless. In the early days, a skilled craftsman would have to be called to hand file and fit a new, custom-made piece, a process that could take hours or even days. This inefficiency was a major bottleneck in production. The solution to this problem, however, would emerge not from the textile mills of Britain, but from the workshops and armories across the Atlantic in the young United States of America, where a new philosophy of manufacturing was taking hold. This new approach became known as the American system of manufacturing, and its core principle was the concept of interchangeable parts. First pursued in the production of firearms by inventors like Eli Whitney and Simeon North, the idea was revolutionary. Instead of one craftsman building a single rifle from start to finish, carefully hand-fitting each unique part, the goal was to produce hundreds of identical trigger mechanisms, barrels, and stocks.
These components were made to such precise measurements that any one of them could be used to assemble or repair any rifle of the same model. Achieving this level of precision required a fundamental shift in technology. It was made possible only by the development of new, highly accurate machine tools. Specialized lathes were created to turn metal parts to exact diameters. Milling machines could cut complex shapes with incredible consistency, and grinders could finish surfaces to a mirror-like smoothness. These tools were not guided by the uncertain hand of a human, but by jigs and fixtures that ensured every piece produced was a near-perfect copy of the one before it. This was the hidden foundation of interchangeability, the ability to reliably replicate complex components.
The application of this system fundamentally altered the nature of manufacturing and assembly. A worker on an assembly line no longer needed to be a master craftsman. Instead, they could be trained in a single task, attaching a specific pre-made part to a larger assembly. When a machine in a factory broke down, a mechanic could simply remove the broken component and replace it with an identical spare from a storeroom, getting the machine running again in minutes rather than days. This development was the final step required for true mass production, allowing for the creation of complex goods at a scale and cost previously unimaginable. This transformation in the organization of labor and production prompted deep reflection among thinkers of the time. Some, like the economist Adam Smith, had earlier argued that the division of labor was the primary engine of economic progress. By breaking a task down, he reasoned, workers became incredibly efficient, increasing productivity and creating greater national wealth for everyone. The factory system, with its specialized tasks and machine-driven pace, appeared to be the ultimate expression of this principle, capable of producing goods in quantities that made them affordable to the general population for the first time. However, other observers saw a darker side to this new world. The philosopher Karl Marx, for instance, analyzed this same process and described it as a source of alienation. In his view, the traditional craftsman who saw a product through from raw material to finished object felt a sense of pride and connection to their work. By contrast, the factory worker, performing the same simple task over and over, became disconnected from the final product and from their own creative potential. Their labor was just another component in the machine, something to be bought and measured by the hour, leading to a profound sense of powerlessness.
Contemporary accounts from the period provide evidence to support both perspectives. Parliamentary reports, known as Blue Books, documented the incredible productivity of the new factories, showing how they fueled national growth and global trade. Yet these same documents, alongside worker testimonies, also detailed the harsh realities of factory life. The 16-hour workdays, the constant risk of injury from unprotected machinery, and the chronic health problems caused by the work environments. The very system that generated unprecedented wealth also created deep social divisions and immense human hardship. The documented experiences from this era of factory discipline continue to powerfully inform modern debates surrounding the relationship between technology, labor, and human well-being. For generations, the speed of information had been bound by the speed of a horse or the speed of a ship. All the engines and railways, the canals and ironworks had accelerated the movement of goods, but a message could still not outrun the messenger. That era was drawing to a quiet, clicking close inside rooms that were islands of intense silence amidst the clamor of the industrial world. In a city telegraph office, the most prominent sound was not the roar of a furnace or the clatter of a loom, but the crisp, rhythmic tapping of a brass key. An operator sat perfectly still, his posture a testament to discipline, his entire being focused on a series of clicks from a small electromagnetic device. His hands moved with an economy of motion, translating a piece of paper covered in handwriting into a language of electrical pulses, a conversation held across miles of silent wire. This new form of communication was built upon a scientific principle discovered decades earlier. The Danish physicist Hans Christian Ørsted had found, almost by accident, that a wire carrying an electrical current created a magnetic field around it, a force that could make a compass needle twitch. It was a subtle, almost magical observation, but it contained a universe of possibility. If electricity could create a brief magnetic pull, then that pull could be used to move a lever, make a mark, or create a sound at a great distance. This was the simple, elegant truth that underpinned the work of inventors like Samuel Morse and his partner Alfred Vail. They devised a system of breathtaking simplicity: a spring-loaded key to open and close an electrical circuit, a single iron wire to carry the current, and a receiver where an electromagnet would pull down a small arm, producing an audible click.
The true genius of their system, however, was not just in the hardware, but in the software, in the code itself. The series of short and long pulses, dots and dashes, was not random. Morse and Vail, according to historical accounts, analyzed the English language, visiting a local printing press to count how many of each letter type the printers kept in their cases. They assigned the shortest and simplest codes to the most common letters. An E, the most frequent letter, was a single dot. A T was a single dash. Less common letters like Q or Z were given longer, more complex sequences. This was a masterpiece of informational efficiency, a code designed from the ground up to transmit messages with the greatest possible speed, saving precious seconds with every tap of the operator's finger. Translating this elegant system into a national network required a vast and difficult physical effort. The materials of this new communication web were copper wire, chosen for its excellent ability to conduct electricity, and millions of tall wooden poles, harvested from forests and treated to resist rot. On each pole, glass or ceramic insulators were mounted, crucial components designed to prevent the precious electrical signal from leaking away into the damp earth. The work of stringing the lines was carried out by crews of linemen, who faced different challenges than the navvies who dug canals. Theirs was a task of height and tension,
hoisting heavy coils of wire, balancing on poles in all weather, and carefully pulling the line just taut enough so it would not snap in the cold or sag in the heat. It was a new kind of construction for a new kind of infrastructure, stretching alongside the railway lines that had become its natural companions. While crossing land was a monumental task, the ultimate challenge lay in crossing the water. The idea of laying a wire across the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, connecting the old world and the new, seemed to many like pure fantasy. Early attempts at undersea cables were disastrous. The immense weight of the wire caused it to snap under its own strain as it was unspooled from the ships. Salt water corroded the primitive insulation, causing the signal to fail. The solution came from a strange material, a natural latex called gutta percha, harvested from a tree in Southeast Asia. This substance proved to be an excellent electrical insulator that was also waterproof and durable under the immense pressure of the deep ocean. It became the critical material that made the dream of a transatlantic cable possible.
Even with the right materials, the logistical challenges were staggering. The greatest engineering minds of the era, backed by immense fortunes, were dedicated to the project. Specially designed ships, the largest of their kind, were built to carry thousands of tons of coiled cable in their holds. The process of laying it was a slow, nerve-wracking crawl across the ocean, with men constantly monitoring the cable's tension and the integrity of the electrical signal. The first successful transatlantic cable, laid in 1858, transmitted a handful of messages, including a 98-word message of congratulations from Queen Victoria to President James Buchanan, before it failed after just 3 weeks. The failure was a bitter disappointment, but it proved the concept was possible. After years of further refinement and another failed attempt that ended with a snapped cable lost 2 miles deep on the ocean floor, success was finally achieved in 1866. When the first stable, permanent connection was made, the world was fundamentally altered. A stockbroker in London could now receive closing prices from the New York Stock Exchange in minutes, not in the 10 to 12 days it took for the fastest steamship to cross the ocean. News of a political development in Washington could be printed in Parisian newspapers the very next morning. This technology caused a profound shift in the human perception of geography. For the first time in history, information had been completely separated from transportation, moving at the speed of electricity rather than the speed of a locomotive. The impact of this instant communication rippled through every level of society. Governments could now administer vast colonial empires with a degree of direct control that was previously impossible, sending orders to distant governors in hours instead of months. Military commanders could coordinate armies in the field with far greater precision. It also gave birth to entirely new organizations, like the modern newswire service, which could gather reports from around the globe and distribute them almost instantly. This, in turn, created a new kind of labor. The telegraph operator became a highly trained and indispensable figure, part of a disciplined international corps who shared their own language of code and technical jargon, and whose skill formed the human link in this vast electronic nervous system. These new arrangements, built on wire, electricity, and human focus, demonstrate a consistent pattern in civilization: the relentless pursuit of methods to overcome the ancient barriers of distance and time.
The final age begins not with a single invention, but with the convergence of them all, found in its most potent form at the docks of London. Here, along the winding Thames, the world's currents met. The sharp smell of coal smoke from the funnels of steamships mingled with the faint scent of tea and cloves from distant shores. Cranes, powered by their own hissing steam engines, lifted heavy cargo from the steel-hulled vessels, their iron arms moving with a strength that hundreds of men could not match. The piercing whistle of a locomotive announced the arrival of another train, its cars ready to carry these global goods inland or to be filled with the products of Britain's factories for export. This was not merely a port, it was a living machine, a great heart where all the iron arteries of the New World connected. This vast network operated with a seamless and relentless logic. Consider a bale of raw cotton, harvested in America and carried across the Atlantic in the belly of a steamship far faster than any sailing vessel. Upon its arrival, the steam crane would lift it from the hold and place it directly onto a waiting railway car. This train, running on steel rails and powered by a coal-fed locomotive, would then speed it north to a textile mill in Manchester. There, the cotton would be processed by machines themselves forged from Bessemer steel, their movements driven by a single, colossal steam engine in the factory's heart. Each step of the journey, from the ocean voyage to the factory floor, was made possible by the interconnected power of steam and metal. The factory engine, in turn, depended on this same integrated system for its very lifeblood. Its insatiable appetite for fuel was fed by coal, brought by another railway line directly from a colliery in the Midlands. That mine, reaching deep into the earth, was kept from flooding by powerful steam-driven pumps, direct descendants of the Newcomen and Watt engines that first made such deep mining possible. The iron for the engine parts, the rails for the tracks, and the beams for the factory structure itself were the product of blast furnaces like those at Coalbrookdale, which had long ago abandoned charcoal for coke. The entire cycle was self-reinforcing. The ability to produce more iron and steel allowed for the building of more engines and railways, which in turn allowed for the mining of more coal to fuel the entire enterprise. Coordinating this immense physical ballet of production and transportation required a new kind of nerve system. This was the role of the electric telegraph. From an office in London, a merchant could receive an order from a client in India, the message having traveled across thousands of miles of undersea cable in a matter of hours. The merchant could then wire the factory in Manchester to confirm the order, instruct a shipping agent in Liverpool to reserve space on a vessel, and arrange for the railway to transport the finished textiles to the port. For the first time in history, the movement of information had become effectively instantaneous, separating communication from the physical limitations of transport and allowing this complex industrial economy to be managed with incredible speed and precision. As a result of this growth, the very landscape of the country was remade. New cities swelled with astonishing speed, rising not from ancient plans, but from immediate industrial need.
Places like Birmingham and Manchester became sprawling territories of brick and slate, their skylines defined not by church spires, but by a forest of factory chimneys. Day and night, these chimneys released plumes of dark smoke, a constant sign of the production below. This smoke settled on every surface, turning the local stone of buildings a uniform shade of gray and black, a visible mark of the new air that residents breathed. The rapid, unplanned nature of this expansion created a new kind of urban environment, one shaped entirely by the demands of the factory. Life within these new industrial cities presented immense challenges. Entire families, often recently arrived from the countryside in search of work, found themselves living in a single rented room within a crowded tenement building. Sanitation was a problem that engineering had not yet solved on a mass scale. Fresh water often came from a shared communal pump, and waste was poorly managed, creating conditions where diseases like cholera could spread with terrifying speed. The constant low rumble of machinery was the background sound to every moment of life, a reminder that the rhythms of the community were now tied not to the seasons, but to the unceasing demands of the clockwork factory.
These conditions led to the formation of a new social structure, profoundly different from the agricultural world it was replacing. Society began to organize itself into new classes. At one end was a growing industrial working class, a population whose only asset was their labor, which they sold for a daily wage. At the other was a new and powerful middle class of factory owners, engineers, bankers, and merchants who managed this new economy. Their success was not based on land ownership, as it had been for the old aristocracy, but on capital, innovation, and the organization of labor. This division shaped the politics, conflicts, and social fabric of the age. For the majority of people, the experience of work was fundamentally transformed. The holistic skill of the artisan, who might have once crafted an entire object from start to finish, was replaced by the divided labor of the factory floor. A worker's day was measured by the factory bell, not by the rising and setting of the sun. The task was often a single, repetitive motion, performed for 12 or more hours, in time with the relentless pace of a machine. Accounts from the era describe the deafening noise of the looms, so loud that verbal communication was impossible, forcing workers to develop their own systems of hand signals. This new form of labor created wealth on an unprecedented scale, but it also raised profound questions about the human cost of such efficiency. This complex reality has long been the subject of careful historical consideration. Period documents reveal two starkly different perspectives existing at the same time. On one hand, economists and industrialists celebrated the immense increase in national wealth, the affordability of once luxurious goods, and the engineering marvels of the age as proof of undeniable progress. They saw the new cities as centers of opportunity and dynamism. On the other hand, social reformers and concerned observers wrote detailed reports on the harsh conditions in the factories and the deep poverty found in the slums. They documented the lives of men, women, and children
whose health was often broken by the demands of industrial labor. Furthermore, while these transformations first took root in the British Isles, they were never destined to remain a purely local event. The principles were universal: the application of machine power to production, the use of fossil fuels for energy, and the creation of high-speed transportation and communication networks. Entrepreneurs and engineers from America, Germany, Belgium, and beyond traveled to witness the British factories and railways, returning home to adapt these new methods to their own resources and societies. This set in motion a global process as different nations began their own industrial journeys, each with unique characteristics, but all following the same fundamental shift away from an economy based on agriculture and craft. The world forged in this era was entirely new, a planet bound together by undersea cables, iron rails, and the smoke trails of steamships. This revolution was not a single event, but a cascade of interconnected changes in technology, society, and the environment. It established a new relationship between humanity and energy, unlocked immense productive power, and created deep social divisions and long-term challenges. Such sweeping and often contradictory transformations demonstrate the profound complexity of a world remade, a process as powerful and relentless as the engines that first set it in motion. And so, our exploration of the Industrial Revolution comes to a gentle close. We've journeyed from the quiet turning of the water wheel to the steady, rhythmic pulse of the first factories. This vast technological transformation was a story of acceleration, of a world finding a new mechanical heartbeat. But even the most powerful engines must eventually cool, their immense energy settling into a quiet, steady warmth. Just as the determined clatter of the loom gave way to the deep stillness of the night, allow the busy thoughts of your day to soften and fade. Let the memory of that relentless forward motion become a distant, peaceful hum, a lullaby of human ingenuity. Rest now and dream of the quiet potential that waits within stillness, in the calm that follows great change. Sleep well.